So last week we talked a little about how Jesus used double level language with Nicodemus, language that had two meanings in order to bring him from words into truth. And he continues that in the next chapter when it says, Jesus knew the Pharisees had heard that he was baptizing and making more disciples than John, though Jesus himself didn't baptize, his disciples did. So he left Judea and returned to Galilee. And this line gets really important. It says he had to go through Samaria on the way. So we got to have a history lesson. Why did he have to go through Samaria? And the answer, of course, is that he didn't have to go. There are three routes north and south in Israel. In fact, it's the reason for the place of Israel. The reason that Israel became the promised land and ultimately became the richest nation on earth under David and Solomon was because it controlled all of the trade routes between Egypt and the rest of the world. And whoever owned those three roads and the water lanes outside those in the Mediterranean could charge a tax on all the caravans that went through, and it was the place to be, and it's why David and Solomon, if you'll remember, David made a pact with the king of Tyre. And of course, that means that they controlled between them also the sea routes. And at that point, they became the wealthiest nation on earth because they controlled those roads. So there are three roads. One road is the one that's right against the Mediterranean, and it's the low road, and it's a popular road except certain seasons of the year there are a lot of mosquitoes and you can get malaria and die. So people typically would use either the mountain road or the river road. Now, between Jerusalem and Galilee, which is where Jesus was going in this story, the shortest route would be through Samaria, right past Mount Gerizim, right exactly the route that he took on this case. However, good Jews would not take that route because you would have to talk to Samaritans. And nobody wanted to talk to a Samaritan, see a Samaritan, eat near a Samaritan, or eat anything a Samaritan had touched because they were that evil. They had broken off as the northern kingdoms. They'd gone off into captivity, and a early Roman leader built them a temple on Mount Gerizim to match the one in Jerusalem. And they worshiped there, and they pretended to worship as if it was Jerusalem. And the Jews got so mad about it that in the 2nd century BC, they mustered an army, and they went to Mount Gerizim, and they tore it down. They tore down the temple. That would be sort of like us getting the deacons and elders together and going and burning down the Cleburne church. Relations would be strained, okay? The folks at Cleburne might not even speak to us at the camp meeting. I don't know. We'll see. But the bottom line is that was a very unfriendly act. And as a result, they were not on speaking terms. And so these half-breed, as they called them, half-breed Samaritans were evil. And every practicing Jew typically would take the long route down the river road in order to avoid contact with these people and in order to avoid having to pass through their territory. Jesus says he had to go through Samaria on the way. Had to. It's an interesting point. So think about your watch. Now, let's go old school. Think about an old school watch. You look at the watch, and really you care about the two hands, right? Most of the time, you want to know where the hour hand is and where the minute hand is, right? And you look at your watch, and it takes an instant for you to get all you need from your watch. But wait. In an old school watch, behind the face, if you were to take the hands and the face off, behind the face are dozens of little bronze and brass gears. And they all bear on a lattice work of supports, and they all mesh together in amazingly complex ways. And of course, there are simple watches. Watches, honestly, just have a minute hand and an hour hand. But watchmakers call everything else you add, like a date or a second hand, or a moon phase, or a chronograph, or an alarm. They add all those things. They're called complications. That's what watchmakers call them. And so a simple watch or a watch with complications, and they number them. They say this is a watch with 6 complications, meaning you can't afford it. And so we have these really complicated watches. Inside those watches, every time you add a complication, it adds another half dozen or 3 dozen little gears and sprockets and different things like that. The complexity of that is really beyond my imagination. There's some videos on YouTube where you can watch these watches being made. And it's really staggering, the level of sophistication to keep a watch. Now, I think of that because I think of how we live in a world with 7 billion people roughly. And a lot of what we see appears to us to be random. And I have come to believe that the apparent randomness is really the illusion of a higher level of order than I can see. And when it says that Jesus had to go to Samaria, that was his divine appointment to do God's will and to be that gear, that mesh in the fabric of humanity by which God's will is done. Now, I think of that, and it's kind of exciting to think that God is in control of such a complex machine. But the very next thought that comes to my mind is, how many divine appointments have I missed? How many gears have I failed to mesh with? How many people have I failed to encounter? How many opportunities have I just blown off because of who I am and what I did? I don't know if Jesus got a memo that said, tomorrow at noon, you need to be by the well. There will be a woman there, and you're going to visit with the woman. Or whether God simply said, try the mountain road this time. The way God speaks to us is typically more like the latter than the former. But in some way or another, this text belies the fact that God was telling Jesus, you have to go and keep an appointment. I have an appointment for you. Go this way. Don't go the usual way. It says eventually he came to the Samaritan village of Sychar, where the field that Jacob gave his son, Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired from the long walk, sat wearily beside the well at noontime. Soon a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and he said to her, please give me a drink. He was alone at the time because his disciples had gone into the village to buy food. Now this is interesting. He had to go to keep a divine appointment. Don't know what level of inspiration he was given about the appointment, but I would say that even if the level was very light, go this way, all of the rest of this could happen just as it's happened to you and me many, many times. We find ourselves in a place at a time, and then suddenly an opportunity appears to him. And this opportunity is this woman. And the woman was surprised, for Jews have refused to have anything to do with Samaritans. Now, how did she know he was a Jew? Because he dressed funny. That's how. The Jews would wear blue borders on their garments, and they would wear tassels on their garments, and they would not shave the corners of their beard. So you could tell a Jew from any time in this time, you could have told an observant Jew. What's also very interesting is that the disciples were not there, and she responds to him. She says, you are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. Why are you asking me for a drink? Now, this gets really interesting because, well, what if I could give you, as a gift, a magic wand? I know you're not supposed to talk about magic in church, but just play along with me. What if I could give you a magic wand, a truly magic wand? And this magic wand, a little light magic wand, is a magic wand that you could use to touch another person. And every person that you touch with this magic wand automatically feels better, has a little bit more joy, has a better self-image or self-impression, has more confidence, and in every way feels more at peace and more strong or more able. That'd be a nice gift, wouldn't it? It'd be a gift that keeps on. Right. So it'd be a nice gift to have a wand that I could go around and just touch people with. And I could touch a succession of people, and I can touch them all day long. And if you knew the real truth, the wand, even after the first touch, works every time. And if you keep touching the same person with it, it'll actually improve their overall permanent sense of joy, not just for the few minutes right after you touch them. So this wand typically will work for a few minutes, but if you keep doing it, it'll actually lift a person's spirits on a general level. Pretty exciting, isn't it? And by now, of course, you've guessed, you already have the wand. And Jesus demonstrates its use in this text. He comes to this woman. I always had a problem in the past when I said, well, why would he come to a woman and ask a favor from her? That seems like an imposition to me, right? Until you understand the whole Semitic basis of a drink of water. The whole concept in the Semitic world of a drink of water is it's an obligation. She should have offered him a drink of water. Go back to the story of Rebecca. It is the Semitic obligation to offer water. So she should have offered him water. She didn't. He asks for water, but it's not really a request for a favor from her. What it really is he is giving her the gift of his non-judgmental respect. You see, his colleagues, his disciples, anybody else in his community would not have spoken to her at all because she was a Samaritan and a woman. And that's why she asks, well, I'm a Samaritan woman. Why would you speak to me? So he does her this amazing favor, not because she deserves his attention, but because he wants to give that as a gift. He looks at her. Now, you notice he's sitting already. He's sitting alone. He has taken up a position, as my father used to say, he's holding forth. He's taken up a position, and I read this to say he was tired. He's taken up a position for a while. He's not coming to her and giving her some information or doing something with her. He has sat down for a while, and he's going to be there whether she's there or not. And then he focuses his attention on her, and he gives her respect that is politically incorrect for him to give her. That's a pretty huge gift. If we're thinking about our magic wand, that is the first effort to use our magic wand, is to give another human being peer level respect. He gives her respect. And the next thing he does is he gives her 100% of his attention. Watch your toes. We have a problem in our culture between self-centeredness and cell phones. We don't give anybody 100% of our attention anymore. My self-centeredness says, oh, it costs me something to give my attention to you. And my cell phone says there's something interesting to do. Let's leave this presence and go someplace else. I was surprised when I thought back on this. You know, the smartphone, as embodied in the iPhone, was only introduced in 2007. Can you think of anything that has changed our culture in less than 10 years in our history more than that has done? It has changed everything about the way we communicate with one another. There was an interesting study that they did where they took and interviewed people. They interviewed people one-to-one, just two people talking, and then afterwards they took a survey on what the people thought about the communication. How deep was the communication? How satisfying was the communication? What did you talk about? Was it a good thing? Was it a bad thing? Whatever. And at the end of that, they realized, get this, that a cell phone, even if it's turned off in visible line of sight during a conversation, automatically shallows and cheapens the interaction. So if you have a cell phone in your hand, if you have a cell phone on the table, if you have a cell phone hanging out of your purse, doesn't even have to be on. And it will limit the sense that the parties get of the depth and meaning of the conversation. So what do? As a practical matter, I'm not going to tell you that Satan invented the iPhone. I'm not going to tell you that. I am going to tell you that Satan can manipulate your life using your iPhone and your Android. And I'm going to suggest that our best policy is to always leave the ringers off, because you never know when you might be in a divine appointment and need to not be interrupted. Now, I know it's harder for ladies. I get that. I totally get it. Gentlemen, buy your wife an iWatch or whatever, so she doesn't have to have the buzzer on her pocket or anything. Do ladies wear pockets anymore? Maybe they do. I don't know. Turn them off. If you have an opportunity to be with someone, get it put away. Do not let these useful, happy devices interfere with Christ's ministry through us. And of course, don't let your selfishness do that either. The next thing he did, he said, well, he spoke up to ask her for something. The next thing he did, he spoke up. Now, there are some people who are more gregarious than others, and some people who speak up more than others. But you know what? If Jesus had said nothing, how would the encounter have ended? She would have filled her water bucket in her skin and she would have left. And she would have thought, I saw a miserable Jew at the well today. And that was the end of what she would have thought of that whole interaction. But because Jesus spoke up, not only her life, but the whole town's life was transformed. So the question is, do you recognize a divine appointment when you see it? And are you willing to have the courage to engage a divine appointment when it happens to you? The next thing he did is he said, Jesus replied, if only you knew the gift that God has for you and who you are speaking to, you would ask me and I would give you living water. But sir, you don't have a rope or a bucket, she said. This well is very deep. The studies indicate this well, research indicates it was probably 75 to 100 feet deep. And besides, you think you're greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us this well? How can you offer better water than he and his sons and his animals enjoyed? Now, he's speaking in double language. She is totally not getting it. She's playing Nicodemus here. It doesn't matter. What does this communication mean? This communication expresses from him to her without any problem that he is interested in her improvement. He is interested in her welfare. He is interested in her joy. He's interested in her thirst being quenched. He has told her, even though she did not understand what he was talking about, he has told her, I want you to be well. Now, we're getting a long list here. When we have an opportunity to meet with someone, we need to give them our utmost undiluted respect and our utmost undiluted attention. We need to speak up and seize the opportunity to communicate. And when we communicate, we need to communicate our desire for their goodness. Now, all those Jesus did in one little communication. Jesus replied, anybody who drinks this water will soon be thirsty again, but those who drink the water I will give will never be thirsty again. it becomes a fresh, bubbling spring within them, giving eternal life. Now, what does he do next? After he communicates with her, he gives her hope. He gives her hope of opportunity. He shares with her his desire for her wellness, and he gives her hope for wellness. And then she responded to him. She said, hey, buddy, what do you know about wells? This is not good. You don't understand. This is Jacob's well. There's no better water than this. He gives her an opportunity to talk. Sometimes, friends, when we're trying to wield our magic wand, what we really want to do is poke somebody with it. Okay? What Jesus did is he gave his full attention to the woman and he let her talk, even though what she was talking was nonsense. Didn't matter. Didn't matter. Nicodemus talked a lot of nonsense too, didn't he? Oh, well, can a man get back into his mother's womb and all this? I mean, that's nonsense. And we know it's nonsense. Jesus knew it was nonsense. Perhaps even Nicodemus knew it was nonsense. But Jesus lets people talk. And sometimes in my self-centeredness, I'm not very good at that. When she spoke, he understood her at a deep level. It's interesting. There's a story out there, a short story by Chekhov. Everybody know who Chekhov is? Russian playwright. Chekhov wrote a story called, I can't remember the name of it right now, but he wrote a story, and it was about a cab driver. Now, in Russia, in those days, a cab driver would have had a horse and a cab, not a yellow taxi with a light on top. So he was a horse-drawn cab driver, and he had just lost his son. His son had died just days before, and his heart was broken. But he had to get back to work because he had to feed his horse, he had to feed himself. And so he's sitting there on the cab, and he's waiting for a fare, and it's snowing, and it's cold, and he's waiting, and finally a fare gets in his cab. And on the way, he says, my son just died. I don't know, folks, if anybody, and there are people in this room who have gone through losing their child before them, I cannot think of anything more horrible in life. And this is exactly what this cab driver had gone through, and he needed someone to listen to him. So he started talking to the first driver and the first passenger, and the first passenger responds by saying, that's too bad, and he closes his eyes and goes to sleep. The second passenger is a bunch of young kids and young teenagers, and they have no interest at all in hearing what the man has to say, and they make it real clear to him. The whole evening he needs somebody to talk to, but no one will listen to him. And at the end of the night, he goes back to the stable and he's brushing his horse off, and he still has not voiced his pain. And so he tells his whole story and his troubles to the horse. I pray that there will be no one in our forever family that lacks a person who will hear their story and their pain. Jesus was willing to listen to this woman spew nonsense. It sometimes hurts to hear someone's pain, but it is a ministry. We even have a ministry in this church. It's called Stephen Ministry. And that's what they do. They listen to people's hearts. And it's exactly what Jesus does in this story. He models it for us, that our opportunity is to bless people with our magic wand. And the last thing that he does really interesting, she says, please, sir, give me this water. I'll never be thirsty again. I won't have to come to get water. And he says, go and get your husband. Now, this is the second instruction he's given her that she's completely ignored. Oh, she says, I don't have a husband. Jesus said, you're right, you don't have a husband. You've had 5 husbands. And you're not married to the fellow you're living with now. You speak the truth. At this point, she says, let's change the subject. She says, sir, you must be a prophet. So tell me, why is it you Jews insist that Jerusalem is the only place to worship, while we Samaritans claim it's here at Mount Gerizim, where our ancestors worship? Now, right now, they're in a place where they can see Mount Gerizim. It's 2,800 feet tall. So they're less than a mile or two away from there, and they can see it. It's an interesting question, though, just to throw this one in. So if you knew that you were talking to God's prophet, what would you ask? This might be worth a little exercise at home. Take that question home and imagine for a minute that God's prophet, and you're convinced that it was God's prophet, is sitting right in front of you, and you now have access one-on-one, personally to a prophet. What would you ask them? Let's see what she asked. She says, why about these, you must be a prophet. Why do they have the worship? And he says, believe me, dear woman, the time is coming, and it won't matter where you worship, on this mountain or in Jerusalem. You Samaritans know very little about the one you worship, but we Jews know more about him, all about him, he says. For salvation comes through the Jews, but the time is coming, indeed it's here now, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. The Father is looking for those who will worship him that way. For God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. And now she tumbles to it. She says, I know the Messiah is coming, the one who's called the Christ. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. And Jesus told her, I am the Messiah. You notice what he did, though? He could have started with that. He waited until their conversation got to the place where she had trust and where the conversation was ready before he saved her. It's really an interesting observation that we might want to take some lessons from. He goes through the whole conversation first, and when she finally brings the subject up, he shares with her the truth. Now, we know what happens next. She runs back to the village as soon as the disciples get back. She runs back to the village. She tells them, hey, I found the Messiah. He knows everything I ever did. It's fantastic. And the whole village comes out and is saved. He stays there for 2 days. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. You know, he could have done the same thing. What if he walked up to the well, saw the woman, recognized his divine appointment, had read his memo. He says, hey, lady, come over here. I know what you were thinking last night. You were trying to decide whether or not you should stay with this fella that you're living with. And you were thinking it was time to move on from this relationship. I know that. I know what you're thinking. Now, go tell the city that you found a guy that can read minds, and he might be the Messiah. Bring him out here. We're going to have a little evangelistic meeting. Same result, right? He would have had the same result. The people would have come out. And he could have had his evangelistic meeting. But look in the face of that choice what Jesus chose to do. He chose to give this woman the magic of respect. We do a thing that we call evangelism. First service, the evangelism director for the conference was here, so, you know. But he's not here today. He's not here second service. We do this thing called evangelism. Evangelism often resembles a large information dump. We give people a lot of really great, true information. And the result is that we have a church full of people who absolutely love truth. They love true information. I'll propose to you that there are a lot of people that are not within the walls of this church that could be here if we shared love first and then truth. And these may be people who were once here. And it may be people who have never heard the truth. We have focused so long on truth seekers, and we may have missed a lot of love seekers. And yet Jesus gives us a very clear blueprint for what reaching love seekers looks like, and it's just using our magic wand to let other people know that we care enough about them to hear them first before we give them the information dump. We got more truth. We have more truth than any organization in the world. We have the truth. Jesus modeled for us how to deliver the truth in the envelope of love. And I propose that this week you and I recognize that we have been commissioned to share love as well as truth. And I'm going to tell you, it takes courage. It takes courage for me, and it takes courage for you to do the things. And let me just go back through the list and make sure. Respect whether they deserve it or not. Absolute unconditional respect. 100% attention without distraction or selfishness. Speaking up to make contact. You know, we often have these stories, and you've heard them 100 times. I was on an airplane, I sat next to a person, never met him before, and all of a sudden this amazing thing happened. I love those stories. Those are divine appointments, and I think they're really important. I think we have an opportunity, however, to make divine appointments with people that we are going to see again that might give us an opportunity to carry a person all the way through the discipleship process and into eternity. And perhaps those divine appointments are even more valuable than the ones that sound so exciting when we hear about them on the airplane. He expressed his desire for her ultimate good. He gave her hope. He let her speak to him. He understood her at a deep level. And then when she asked for the truth, he gave her the truth. If that model worked for Jesus, the same God is setting up divine appointments for you and me today. And it can work for us. But we have to have the courage and the willingness. The courage and the willingness to let God's will work through us. Because I'm telling you, I'm tempted. I'm tempted to sit at that well and let her go. I'm tempted to just wait for the boys to bring me some food. The boys are having a hard job. They're in a Samaritan village trying to get food that Samaritans haven't touched. Good for them. No wonder it took them so long. They come back with a bunch of Samaritan tainted food, and Jesus said, I don't need your food. I just did the will of my Father. I just expressed love. We're about to save a village here. I don't need any of that. I'm going to give you the opportunity to do some harvesting. Read the rest of the text for yourself. He says, I'm going to give you the opportunity to do some harvesting that you didn't plant. Because there's a village on its way out here right now, and we're going to share with them the truth, and a whole bunch of Samaritans are going to be saved. And I'm telling you up in front, I want you to be excited about it, because I know deep down you're probably not going to be excited about it. But we're about to have a whole bunch of disciples, new disciples that are Samaritans. So our prayer today, I think, should be that God will reveal to us his divine appointments, and that he will transform us into the Jesus that we need to be in order to engage people at a level of respect and attentiveness that is not human for us. Let me pray. Heavenly Father, I have been guilty of being task-driven and missing opportunities to love people. I have, to not candy-coat it, been guilty of being self-centered. I have been guilty of being distracted. I ask your forgiveness for the way that I have treated people. And I ask for your transformational, powerful Holy Spirit to help me to be as attentive as Jesus would want me to be. There are those in this room that are joining me in this prayer. We want to be your loving, caring, truth-filled evangelists. And we want that to happen for us in every divine appointment that you have for us. When another gear interlocks with ours, we will ask that you would help us to recognize it. Help us to see every other person in this complex system the way that you see them, as a person for whom Jesus died. Please give us the courage to speak up, to listen, to love, and to save. We know that this is your will, and we know it's exactly what Jesus did, and it's in his name we pray. Amen. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace.